Chapter 7. Consequence of Unregulated Desire. Therefore, O best of warriors, in the very beginning curb this great symbol of sin by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. Bhagavad Gita 3:41. In the previous chapter, we established the Son of God as the perfect servant, whose triumph began with the simple, profound act of acknowledging his eternal identity as subordinate to the supreme controller. He entered the desert, his victorious field, fixed in obedience and unperturbed by the confusion that afflicted mankind. The struggle now shifts from the conceptual challenge of submission to the gross material allurements that perpetually bind the conditioned soul, the temptations of physical comfort, wealth, and worldly dominion. This chapter examines the second phase of the trial, rooted in Milton's Paradise Regained, Book 2, wherein Satan attempts to lure the son by appealing to the most basic yet most destructive forces of material existence: lust, passion, and greed. The son's perfect rejection of these snares serves as pure instruction for achieving true liberation. The entire endeavor of spiritual freedom hinges upon successfully regulating the senses against the internal enemy of desire, as powerfully instructed in our chapter motto. This guidance is the practical weapon wielded by the son against the tempter's onslaught of material offerings. My father, during a quiet afternoon by the river, once reflected, "Son, desire is a wildfire. Uncontrolled, it consumes. Regulated, it fuels the soul's ascent." This chapter, enriched by his wisdom and the Gita's teachings, explores how the son's mastery over these temptations paves the way to paradise regained, offering a lesson for today's society grappling with consumerism and unbridled ambition. Challenge of material desire. Before examining the specific temptations faced by the son, it's essential to understand the universal nature of material desire and its role in spiritual life. The Gita presents desire not as inherently evil but as a force that becomes destructive when unregulated and misdirected. Like fire, desire can serve beneficial purposes when properly controlled, providing motivation for constructive action, creativity, and even spiritual aspiration, but becomes catastrophically destructive when allowed to burn without restraint. Contemporary psychology recognizes similar dynamics in understanding human motivation and addiction. The same neurochemical pathways that drive us toward necessary survival activities like eating and reproduction can become hijacked by artificial stimulants, leading to compulsive behaviors that ultimately undermine well-being. Modern consumer culture deliberately exploits these vulnerabilities, creating artificial desires through sophisticated marketing techniques that promise fulfillment through material acquisition. The son's encounter with temptation provides a masterclass in recognizing and transcending these manipulative appeals. His responses demonstrate principles that remain relevant for anyone seeking to maintain spiritual focus while navigating a world designed to capture and exploit human desires. Satan, observing the son's physical vulnerability after fasting 40 days, launches his opening temptation by appealing to necessity. He attempts to exploit the natural desire for food, disguised as a reasonable observer, tempting the son to utilize his divine power for immediate personal comfort, turning the stones of the wilderness into bread. Lust as the destroyer of knowledge. This temptation, seemingly benign, targets the senses, which the Gita identifies as the sitting places of lust. Lust, or the uncontrolled craving for pleasure, is the greatest sinful enemy and the primary force that obscures the pure consciousness of the living soul. Like smoke covering fire or dust covering a mirror, it shrouds the spiritual spark. The ultimate goal is self-realization, and lust is the force that acts as the destroyer of knowledge and self-realization. In today's world, this mirrors the obsession with instant gratification that characterizes much of contemporary culture. Fast food promises immediate satisfaction while undermining long-term health. Social media platforms provide instant dopamine hits through likes and comments while fragmenting attention and reducing capacity for sustained focus. Consumer culture promotes the illusion that happiness can be purchased, leading to cycles of acquisition and disappointment that prevent deeper fulfillment. The son's transcendental stability is evident in his immediate, unwavering reply, establishing that his dependence is fixed upon the Supreme. Man lives not by bread only, but each word proceeding from the mouth of God. He recognizes that true sustenance comes from aligning with the divine order, not through material sense gratification. This principle extends far beyond literal food consumption. The sun demonstrates that spiritual beings require spiritual nourishment, meaning, purpose, connection with the transcendent, more than material comforts. While physical needs must be met appropriately, they should not dominate consciousness or dictate life priorities. The science of sense regulation. Modern neuroscience validates ancient teachings about the importance of sense regulation. Research shows that practices like mindful eating, digital fasting, and sensory meditation literally rewire the brain, strengthening areas associated with self-control while reducing reactivity to impulsive desires. Studies of successful athletes, artists, and entrepreneurs consistently show that peak performance requires the ability to delay immediate gratification in service of longer-term goals. The sun's temperance, invincible besides, for no allurement yields to appetite, represents the perfected state toward which all spiritual discipline aims. This doesn't mean suppressing natural needs, but rather maintaining conscious choice about when and how to satisfy them, ensuring that physical requirements serve spiritual purposes rather than dominating them. A person fixed in spiritual consciousness is automatically trained not to accept food not meant for human consumption. This extends beyond dietary choices to include all forms of sensory input, entertainment, information, social interactions that either support or undermine spiritual development. The sun's refusal confirms that the path to curbing destructive desire begins with regulation of the senses, ensuring that the body is maintained only to remain fit for service to the divine. Applications of sense regulation. The principle of sense regulation finds practical application across all areas of modern life. Digital consumption. Just as the sun refuses to create bread from stones for immediate gratification, contemporary practitioners might establish boundaries around social media use, choosing specific times for checking messages rather than responding to every notification impulse. This creates space for deeper focus and more meaningful activities. Consumer choices. The spiritual principle of need versus want becomes relevant when making purchasing decisions. Rather than buying items impulsively based on advertising appeals or social pressure, spiritually minded individuals might pause to consider whether acquisitions truly serve their well-being or merely feed desires for status and novelty. Entertainment selection. The quality of mental input significantly affects consciousness, just as food quality affects physical health. Choosing entertainment that elevates rather than degrades consciousness, books, films, music that inspire rather than merely stimulate, supports spiritual development. Relationship boundaries. Sense regulation includes discernment about social environments and relationships. Spending time with people who encourage spiritual growth rather than those who constantly seek material pleasures helps maintain proper focus and values. When the temptation of necessity fails, Satan shifts his strategy to the more intoxicating allure of material ambition. He argues that the sun's great purpose requires great means of enterprise, postulating the mantra of the materialist: money brings honor, friends, conquest, and realms. The conditioning of passion. The mode of passion is driven by ambition and intense, insatiable endeavor. It is characterized by great attachment, uncontrollable desire, hankering, and intense effort. Activities performed in this mode are enacted from a sense of false self-identification and are always done with great effort, all directed towards satisfying personal desires. The result of such endeavors, divorced from transcendental purpose, is ultimately miserable. Satan's argument perfectly reflects this mentality, the belief that one must accumulate vast resources to accomplish anything significant. This mindset binds the individual to the fruits of action, perpetually cycling through work and reaction, a pattern evident in modern corporate burnout driven by endless profit-chasing and growth imperatives. The mode of passion creates a particular kind of suffering because it generates temporary satisfaction followed by increased craving. Unlike ignorance, which produces dullness and apathy, passion creates high energy and engagement but directs it toward ultimately futile pursuits. People in passion work extremely hard and achieve impressive results by material standards, yet find themselves increasingly anxious, competitive, and dissatisfied. Contemporary examples include workaholism, status anxiety, and the constant pressure to upgrade lifestyle markers: larger houses, newer cars, more expensive vacations. passionate person achieves these goals but discovers that each accomplishment only temporarily satisfies before generating new desires. Treadmill of ambition accelerates rather than providing lasting fulfillment. The demonic mentality of greed. Directly springing from the motive passion is greed, one of the three principal causes that lead to the degradation of the soul. Satan's counsel is the voice of the demonic, whose desires to acquire money are unlimited. The Gita describes this consciousness. The demonic person thinks, "So much wealth do I have today, and I will gain more according to my schemes. So much is mine now, and it will increase in the future more and more." This individual is convinced by false self-identification that I am the Lord of everything, I am the enjoyer, I am perfect, powerful, and happy. This relentless striving leads the demonic to act in any sinful way, often securing wealth through illegal or unethical means, thinking that their vast wealth results from their own endeavor and personal ability, rather than understanding the complex web of interdependence that makes any achievement possible. My father once warned, "Greed is a bottomless pit. Modern billionaires chasing ever more wealth prove it daily." This observation highlights how even those who achieve unprecedented material success often remain driven by insatiable desire for more, suggesting that the problem lies not in insufficient resources but in the consciousness that relates to resources as the source of security and identity. The psychology of never enough. Modern psychology recognizes patterns of addiction and compulsion that parallel the Gita's description of passionate and greedy mentalities. Researchers have identified hedonic adaptation, the tendency for increases in wealth or material possessions to provide only temporary satisfaction before baseline happiness levels return. This creates a cycle where individuals constantly seek external changes to maintain the temporary highs associated with acquisition. Studies of wealthy individuals consistently show that beyond meeting basic needs, additional wealth provides diminishing returns in terms of actual well-being. Yet the cultural narrative that equates financial success with personal worth creates psychological pressure to continue accumulating regardless of actual need or satisfaction. The demonic mentality described in the Gita manifests in contemporary culture through several recognizable patterns. Corporate malfeasance. Companies that prioritize short-term profits over long-term sustainability, employee well-being, or environmental protection exemplify greedy consciousness that justifies harmful actions through self-serving rationalizations. Political corruption. Public officials who exploit their positions for personal gain rather than serving constituents demonstrate the demonic tendency to consider oneself the lord of everything, entitled to unlimited acquisition. Social media influence. The commodification of personal relationships and experiences for monetary gain, treating followers as sources of income rather than genuine community, reflects the greedy consciousness that sees everything as potential profit. Environmental destruction. Industries that externalize environmental costs while privatizing profits demonstrate the demonic blindness to interdependence and long-term consequences that characterizes unlimited desire for personal gain. Satan escalates his offer, presenting the panoramic view of kingdoms and their glory, urging the son to accept the throne of a vast empire to fulfill his mission. The son, however, with calmness unprovoked, dismisses this temptation, recognizing its futility. True renunciation. This definitive rejection represents the hallmark of true renunciation. Text clearly states that renunciation of work and work in devotion both lead to liberation, but work in devotion is better than mere renunciation of fruit of work. The true renunciate is defined as one who is unattached to the fruits of his work, and who works as he is obligated. The son's rejection of the throne is not an escape from duty, but recognition that this particular material kingship is not his prescribed responsibility. His mission is transcendental, not political, and attempting to seize power prematurely or through Satan's means would constitute engaging in another's duties, which is dangerous. This distinction becomes crucial for understanding spiritual renunciation in contemporary contexts. True renunciation doesn't require abandoning all worldly activities but rather transforming the consciousness with which activities are performed. Parent caring for children with love and attention to their development engages in spiritual practice. A teacher instructing students with genuine concern for their growth serves the divine through education. A business owner operating ethically while providing valuable services participates in spiritual action. Timing of divine action. The Sun asserts that all events are best fulfilled in their due time, and leaves the outcome to his due time and providence. This submission to divine timing represents a crucial aspect of spiritual maturity, understanding that forcing outcomes through inappropriate means ultimately undermines the very purposes we hope to achieve. Contemporary applications include resisting pressure to compromise ethical principles for career advancement, refusing to exploit relationships for personal gain, and maintaining faith in natural processes rather than manipulating situations through dishonest means. The Sun's patience demonstrates that aligned action performed at the right time with pure motivation achieves more than aggressive effort driven by personal ambition. Leadership through example. The Sun's conduct serves the purpose of educating others through his example. Whatever action is performed by a great person, common people follow in his footsteps. By demonstrating perfect, non-attached action, the Sun sets an ideal standard, showing that true leadership requires adhering strictly to divine principles rather than following materialistic paths. This principle applies to anyone in positions of influence: parents, teachers, supervisors, community leaders. The consciousness with which we perform our roles inevitably affects those who observe us. Leaders who maintain integrity despite external pressures inspire others to similar dedication. Those who compromise principles for expedience teach others that ethics are optional when convenience demands it. Contemporary examples of principled leadership include ethical business practices. Company leaders who maintain fair labor practices, environmental responsibility, and honest marketing despite competitive pressures demonstrate the Sun's example of rejecting expedient but harmful shortcuts. Educational integrity. Teachers and professors who prioritize genuine learning over standardized test scores or grade inflation serve their students' actual development rather than artificial metrics. Political service. Public officials who make decisions based on constituents' long-term welfare rather than political popularity or personal advantage exemplify the Sun's rejection of power for its own sake. Community leadership. Individuals who organize neighborhood improvements, volunteer for charitable causes, or mentor young people without seeking recognition demonstrate service-oriented leadership. As Satan unveils the panoramic majesty of Rome and its attendant grandeur and majestic show of luxury, the Sun remains unmoved. He sees the vast empire not as glory, but as a system that governs nations under yoke and is built on lust and rapine. The pitfall of passionate happiness. The Sun perceives that happiness derived from material magnificence is contaminated by the mode of passion. The Gita explains that there are three kinds of happiness the conditioned soul experiences. The happiness derived from passionate action is that which in the beginning may be just like nectar but at the end is just like poison. Such temporary, sensory enjoyment is pursued by those focused on personal gratification. My father once noted, "Luxury fades. Look at former celebrities desperately chasing youth and relevance." This observation highlights how material pleasures, no matter how refined or expensive, inevitably disappoint because they cannot satisfy the soul's deeper needs for meaning, connection, and transcendence. The passionate happiness that characterizes much of contemporary culture follows predictable patterns: initial excitement about new acquisitions, experiences, or achievements, brief satisfaction while novelty remains, gradual habituation and boredom, renewed seeking for the next source of stimulation. This cycle prevents individuals from discovering the more stable happiness that comes through spiritual development and genuine service. The wisdom of spiritual indifference. The Sun stands above material attractions as one whose activities of self-realization are night for persons materially absorbed. Materialistic people, being asleep to self-realization, dream of varieties of sense pleasure while perpetually suffering happiness and distress. The Sun, however, is always indifferent to materialistic happiness and distress, and continues his spiritual activities undisturbed by material reaction. This spiritual indifference should not be confused with callousness or lack of compassion. Rather, it represents freedom from being controlled by external circumstances. When one's happiness depends on material conditions, wealth, health, relationships, achievements, one becomes vulnerable to constant anxiety about gaining and maintaining these conditions. Spiritual indifference means finding a source of peace and contentment that remains stable regardless of changing circumstances. Contemporary examples include individuals who maintain equanimity during economic downturns, health challenges, or social difficulties because their sense of identity and purpose comes from sources deeper than material security. This doesn't mean ignoring practical responsibilities, but rather maintaining perspective about what truly matters for genuine well-being. The transcendental platform. By rejecting the fleeting sovereignty of the world, the Son demonstrates his position on the transcendental platform of spiritual consciousness, which is the only means of being delivered from the clutches of this contaminated material world. This achievement of spiritual stability, where one is no longer worried about the dualities of the material world, such as heat and cold or misery and happiness, makes him eligible for liberation. The transcendental platform represents a state of consciousness that remains constant regardless of external fluctuations. Like the sun that shines equally on pleasant gardens and garbage dumps, the spiritually realized person maintains inner peace whether experiencing material success or failure, praise or criticism, pleasure or pain. This stability comes not through suppressing natural human emotions but through identifying with the eternal spiritual self rather than temporary material circumstances. When consciousness is rooted in relationship with the divine, external events become opportunities for service and growth rather than sources of disturbance. Satan's progression from basic physical needs to wealth to political power reflects a sophisticated understanding of human psychology. Each temptation appeals to a different level of desire, from survival instincts to ego gratification to the ultimate fantasy of unlimited control. The hierarchy of desires. Modern psychology recognizes hierarchical patterns in human motivations similar to those demonstrated in the Son's temptations. Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs suggests that humans focus on basic survival requirements before seeking safety, belonging, esteem, and self-actualization. Satan's temptations follow a similar progression, appealing first to physical needs, then security through wealth, and finally to the highest ego gratification through dominion over others. The Son's responses demonstrate that spiritual consciousness transcends this hierarchy by finding fulfillment through connection with the divine rather than satisfaction of escalating material desires. This doesn't eliminate natural needs but places them in proper perspective relative to spiritual purposes. The illusion of control. Each of Satan's offers promises increased control over circumstances, the power to create food at will, the security that comes with wealth, the authority that accompanies political position. These appeals target the fundamental anxiety that accompanies material existence, the fear of being vulnerable to forces beyond our control. The Son's rejections demonstrate that true security comes not through accumulating power over external circumstances but through alignment with the intelligence and love that governs the universe. This surrender paradoxically provides greater security than attempts at control because it connects individual consciousness with unlimited divine resources. The progression of spiritual testing. The sequence of temptations also represents the natural progression of challenges that face spiritual practitioners. Beginning seekers often struggle with basic sensory desires, food, entertainment, sexual impulses. As practice matures, more subtle temptations emerge related to wealth, status, and recognition. Advanced practitioners may face the ultimate test of spiritual pride, the temptation to use spiritual attainments for personal aggrandizement rather than service. The Son's responses provide guidance for each stage of this progression, showing that the fundamental principle remains constant, maintaining focus on divine will rather than personal gratification, regardless of the level at which temptation operates. The Son's example provides practical guidance for navigating the particular challenges of contemporary life, where traditional sources of meaning have weakened while sophisticated marketing and technology create unprecedented opportunities for distraction and desire. Digital age challenges. Modern technology creates temptations that parallel those faced by the Son but operate at unprecedented speed and scale. Social media platforms offer the digital equivalent of turning stones to bread, instant gratification through likes, comments, and shares that temporarily satisfy the ego's need for recognition but leave deeper needs unmet. The wealth temptation appears in the form of get-rich-quick schemes, cryptocurrency speculation, and the constant pressure to monetize every skill or hobby. Promise that money will solve all problems remains as seductive today as when Satan offered the sun unlimited resources. Power temptation manifests through opportunities to build online influence, manipulate public opinion, or exploit others' vulnerabilities for personal advantage. The democratization of media has made it possible for anyone to seek the kind of dominion that once required political or military achievement. Maintaining spiritual focus. The sun's example suggests several principles for maintaining spiritual focus amid contemporary distractions. Conscious consumption. Making deliberate choices about information intake, entertainment, and social interactions rather than passively consuming whatever appears most immediately appealing. Purpose-driven action. Evaluating opportunities based on their alignment with genuine service and personal growth rather than immediate gratification or external recognition. Community support. Associating with others who share similar values and spiritual aspirations, providing mutual encouragement to maintain higher perspectives when surrounded by materialistic culture. Regular practice. Maintaining daily spiritual disciplines that strengthen inner stability and discrimination, making it easier to recognize and reject subtle temptations. Service orientation. Finding ways to contribute to others' well-being, which naturally reduces self-centered concerns and provides meaning that transcends material achievements. The sun's rejection should not be interpreted as condemnation of all material engagement, but rather as demonstration of the proper relationship between spiritual and material dimensions of existence. Sacred materialism. When consciousness is properly oriented toward the divine, material activities become opportunities for spiritual expression rather than obstacles to spiritual development. Eating becomes communion with the source of nourishment, work becomes service to the common good, and relationships become opportunities for mutual spiritual growth. Key lies in motivation and awareness. Activities performed with genuine care for their beneficiaries and conscious recognition of divine presence become forms of worship, while the same activities performed solely for personal gratification or ego satisfaction create spiritual bondage. The middle path. The sun's example suggests a middle path between indulgence and extreme asceticism. He doesn't condemn food, wealth, or authority as inherently evil, but rather demonstrates proper relationship with them. Basic needs are met appropriately, resources are accepted when they serve legitimate purposes, and authority is exercised when it genuinely benefits others. This balanced approach provides practical guidance for contemporary spiritual seekers who must navigate material responsibilities while maintaining spiritual focus. The goal is not to eliminate all desires but to purify them, ensuring they serve rather than subvert spiritual development. Conclusion. The second phase of the temptation, culminating in the rejection of wealth and power, serves as definitive instruction on conquering the grossest obstacles to spiritual life. The sun's victory over lust, passion, and greed confirms that the path to paradise regained lies not in achieving external glory, but in achieving internal mastery, perfect self-control, and unwavering focus on the supreme. My father often said, "Control the mind and you control the world." This wisdom reflects the understanding that outer circumstances naturally align when inner consciousness is properly established. The sun demonstrates that true power comes through surrender to divine will rather than assertion of personal ambition. The sun has thus proved that the performance of devotional service is superior to any temporary material gain. His actions, performed without attachment for the sake of leading people on the right path, demonstrate authentic spiritual practice that ensures he is not affected by sinful reactions. His purity is absolute, placing him beyond all three modes of material nature. Having conquered the internal enemies of desire, which were the root cause of Adam and Eve's misery and entanglement, the sun proceeds with confidence toward the final challenges. His mastery over material temptations provides a foundation of inner strength that will serve him in the subtler trials to come. The lesson for contemporary seekers is clear. Genuine spiritual progress requires honest confrontation with our desires and the willingness to subordinate immediate gratification to higher purposes. This doesn't mean suppressing natural needs, but rather ensuring they serve rather than dominate our spiritual development. The sun's example shows that such discipline, far from creating deprivation, opens the door to fulfillment that transcends anything material pleasure can provide. Through regulation of the senses, transformation of desire into devotion, and consistent focus on divine service, the paradise that was lost through uncontrolled craving can be regained through conscious surrender to the supreme will. This is the promise held out to all sincere practitioners, that inner mastery creates the foundation for eternal peace and unlimited spiritual realization.